Yum yum!
Hi and welcome to this quick tip for MODO. In this short video I'm going to be introducing you to the material library function in MODO. Now this feature has been part of MODO for several releases, but I think it's widely underused, and I think the reason for that is that people don't really understand how it works. So I'm hoping this video will help to remedy that. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what you shouldn't do. What you shouldn't do is to try and drag existing materials that are already applied to items in your scene straight into the library, because it won't work. And the reason it won't work is because the masking that's already applied onto those materials is going to break when you try and drag it into the global environment of the library. So to make sense of that, let me just demonstrate. Let me grab the copper material and just drag it into the library. And you can see that's very unsatisfactory. It's replaced my copper material with an item just called group, and then it's renamed this group here. And the reason for that is because my copper material had a mask applied to it. In this case, it was a material tag. The material tag tells the copper material to only be applied onto polygons that have the material tag copper. So that's not going to work in the global environment of the library. So the easiest way to avoid that is to create a subgroup. So just select your material, Ctrl G to group it, and we'll also rename this to copper. And then, because this group is no longer masked, I can drag this into the library, and you can see that it doesn't break anything up here, and it retains the name. And with that done, I can now use this copper material throughout my shader tree. So let's drag it into this metal folder, unpause preview, and you can see that's duplicated the material on this other sphere. But a more efficient way of using the library is to create materials directly within the library itself. So I'm going to select the library item and I'm going to add a group. And inside that group, I'm going to add a material, and I'm going to name my group Cobalt. And then I'm going to set about creating a cobalt material. So let's set the diffuse amount to 0, specular amount to 100, and from my specular color, I'm going to select cobalt from the list of colors under metals. And with that done, I can then select an item in my scene, and let's just grab this cobalt group inside the brass item, unpause preview to see the results, and there is my new material. But of course, the big benefit of using the material library is that you can make global changes to your scene very quickly. If you have a material that's applied to multiple items, like this copper material, if you change one setting in the library, it will update everything in the entire scene. As you can see here, both of my materials have been updated accordingly. But of course, you still have the ability to make local overrides. So for example, I've reduced the roughness in both the copper materials to 20%, but if I go back to this one and add a constant layer and set that layer's effect to roughness, I can then individually control the roughness of this particular material in the scene, as you can see. So let's set that to 50, and you can see that both the copper materials have different levels of roughness. And of course, despite the local override, any other changes I make to the material will still be applied globally. So for example, if I decide to tweak the color of my copper, let's say I decide to make it more red, you can see that both of the materials are being updated, even though one has a different level of roughness than the other. One particularly good workflow is to combine the library with the preset system. So if I open the preset browser and I drag a preset directly into the library without first applying it to anything in the scene, I'll have the ability to apply that preset to multiple items in the scene while retaining the ability to make global changes and local overrides. So now that I've dragged this preset into my library, I can apply it to multiple items in the scene simply by dragging and dropping it in the shader tree. And once I've applied it to different items, I can tweak everything in one place in the material library. So let's say I decide to increase the specular amount. You can see as I do that, it'll update both the materials that have had preset applied to them. An alternative to using the material library would be to create instances in the shader tree, but the drawback of this workflow is that it's much harder to know where your master material is when you come back to the scene at a later date. For example, if I was to take this lead material and create an instance of this and then duplicate it in my shader tree, when I come back to the scene with the shader tree all closed, let's collapse it holding shift and then reopen it, really isn't obvious where the master material is, whereas if I use the material library, I always know exactly where to find the masters. So if you often work with scenes where you need to reuse variants of the same material across many items, then I strongly recommend that you check out MODO's material library. I hope you found this short tutorial useful, and thank you very much for watching.